Hi, I've collected 200 incredibly interesting historical photos that you've hardly seen before. These are authentic pictures from the past. Let's go. In February 1970, Lance Corporal Charles C. Seed of Portsmouth, Ohio, carries an elderly Vietnamese woman who couldn't keep up with a U.S. patrol 22 miles southwest of Da Nang. On October 23, 1952, a New York City Subway 4 train derailed at Mosholu Parkway in the Bronx, leaving multiple cars piled and twisted across the tracks. On March 21, 1960, about 5,000 people gathered outside the Sharpeville police station to protest South Africa's apartheid pass laws by offering themselves for mass arrest. Police opened fire on the unarmed crowd at about 1:30 p.m., firing 1,344 rounds and killing 69 people. In September 1944, a Royal Air Force Hawker Typhoon unleashes all 8 rockets in one burst at a tugboat in the Scheldt Estuary, Netherlands. This is Francesco Frank Lentini, photographed in 1903 as a teenager, already billed in America as the three-legged boy. He was born in Sicily in 1889 with a parasitic twin that left him with 3 legs and 2 sets of genitalia. On February 1, 1951, KTLA Los Angeles filmed and broadcast a Nevada test site nuclear detonation, the first atomic blast ever shown on television. The station parked a remote truck in the desert and shot the mushroom cloud from miles away. On January 22, 1966, Dick Van Dyke was put in the Parada del Sol jail in Scottsdale, Arizona, during a publicity stunt for being not Western enough. The festival famously staged playful arrests like this, locking celebrities behind bars in front of the crowd for laughs. 1900 on the Zambezi River, a hunter and local helpers restrain a large crocodile at the shoreline while men aim rifles at close range. The photo documents big game hunting tactics of the period, using a group to immobilize the animal before killing it. In May 1960, Adolf Eichmann was smuggled out of Argentina by Israeli agents and taken to an El Al aircraft with his eyes covered, bound for Israel to stand trial. His 1961 Jerusalem trial made global headlines, and he was executed in 1962. 1943. A B-25 Mitchell from the 498th Squadron, 345th Bombardment Group, streaks over Japanese anti-aircraft guns in the jungle. This bomber was built for brutal low-level runs. February 2, 1897. The Pennsylvania state capitol in Harrisburg burns as crowds watch from the snow. 9 years later, a brand-new state house was dedicated on the same spot, like the city hit reset on history. 1945 in Korea. Japanese prisoners of war stare at a wrecked Ki-43 fighter beside a bomber still burning on the airfield. The twisted metal and thick smoke make it clear how fast control of the sky can vanish in a single day. In 1927, the Bath School disaster in Michigan shocked the nation when a school was destroyed by a hidden attack planned by local official Andrew Kehoe. 45 people died and 58 were injured. In 1998, Carla Faye Tucker was executed by lethal injection in Texas at age 38, a case that drew worldwide attention because she was a rare woman on the state's death row. She was the first woman executed in Texas. In 1915, Ernest Shackleton's ship Endurance was crushed by Antarctic ice, leaving 27 men trapped for more than a year. Shackleton then sailed a tiny lifeboat about 800 miles to find help, and every man returned alive. In the 1920s at United Artists, Mary Pickford poses with her younger brother Jack on a backlot, holding prop pistols like a silent film stunt. She opened the decade with 2 huge hits, Pollyanna in 1920 and Little Lord Fauntleroy in 1921. A crowded wartime yard watches as a person is hoisted high on a line inside a giant hangar, captured in a rare official photo. The scene looks like a harsh lesson staged for dozens of witnesses. The steamboat Brooklyn sits half-sunk on the Kentucky River, with its decks tilted like a broken staircase into the water. Riverboats like this once hauled people and cargo through shallow bends, But one bad leak or hard grounding could end a whole vessel in hours. January 31st, 1940. The United States issued the first Social Security check, turning a new law into real cash for an ordinary person. That single payment became the starting gun for a program that would later support tens of millions of retirees and disabled Americans. February 1934. John Dillinger sits in a Crown Point courtroom handcuffed to Deputy Sheriff R.M. Pierce, looking calm in shirt sleeves as cameras watch. Weeks later, he slipped out anyway, turning a routine custody moment into a legend. 1944. In Montabourg, Army bulldozers crawl through a smashed town to clear a road for American supply trucks heading toward the Cherbourg front. The quiet circle of soldiers in the rubble feels like a movie set, except every broken wall is real. This is Mars, photographed from up to 225 million miles away, with rover tracks cutting across a silent plain under a dusty sky. That hazy horizon is real Martian dust in the air, the same fine powder that can cover solar panels and even hide distant hills. Since the Ethiopian Ball in New York in 1778, cotillions and debutante balls became a major tradition in middle and upper-class Black America, with young women presented in formal procession. 1942 in Durban, South African Native Military Corps stretcher-bearers sit packed together with their kits and long staffs, waiting to ship out for the Madagascar campaign. These men were the lifeline after a hit, hauling wounded soldiers to safety. The Austro-Hungarian Navy's Cayman-class torpedo boats, built from 1904 to 1910, line the harbor like a swarm of small, fast hunters. All 24 served hard in World War I on escort, minesweeping, and shore attack missions. A Sopwith Camel clings to the British airship R-33, showing an early attempt to launch and recover fighters in mid-air. It was a wild idea of a flying aircraft carrier, decades before modern carrier decks made it routine. In 1957, Chevrolet offered the Bel Air with rare ramjet mechanical fuel injection, letting the 283 cubic inch V8 make more power. The system cost about $500 to $550, so only a tiny number were ordered. In 1990, Italian collector Luigi Lineri sits inside a room packed with stones he gathered from the Adige River and sorted for more than 50 years. Each shelf looks like a secret language of shapes, built one patient find at a time. February 1945, the Japanese destroyer Akishima lies wrecked in Manila Harbor after American aircraft struck the ships trapped there. From above it looks almost peaceful, but it is a frozen snapshot of how air power could erase a warship in minutes. Libya, 1942. Soldiers of the 1st Battery, 5th Group Semoventi, crowd onto a Semovente M40-75/18, Italy's compact assault gun built for desert fights. 1951. Fans pack around the poster for Rocky Marciano versus Joe Louis, a passing of the torch in boxing's biggest spotlight. Marciano later said beating an older Louis felt sad, but necessary, and 1 year after that, he won the heavyweight championship. 1932. German Chancellor Franz von Papen talks closely with Kurt von Schleicher, the man who would soon replace him. Papen's backroom moves later helped open the door for Adolf Hitler to take power, a decision that haunted Europe. The Caproni Campini N1 first flew in August 1940, an Italian jet that actually used a piston engine to drive a compressor and burn fuel in the exhaust for thrust. It looked futuristic, but the motor jet was hot and inefficient. May 1944. The Japanese destroyer Harusami sits in dry dock at Uraga after damage from the United States Navy submarine USS Wahoo, with its boiler exposed like an open chest. April 27, 1994. Nelson Mandela casts a ballot in a national election for the first time in his life. After decades of being shut out, that simple slip of paper became a turning point the whole world watched. 1974, at Madison Square Garden, Arnold Schwarzenegger steps on stage at Mr. Olympia, the contest that crowned the world's top bodybuilder. That era turned him from a muscle champion into a global name, and the cameras never stopped after this. February 1942 on the Northwestern Front, a Soviet Aerosan RF-8 races over snow, on skis, carrying fighters and a mounted machine gun. These prop-driven sleds could glide where trucks got stuck, turning winter into a fast hidden highway. June 22, 1917. British troops pose on a shattered German railway engine near Péronne, Somme, and leave graffiti like a signature on captured steel. A knocked-out locomotive meant more than scrap because trains were the front line's fuel line for men. London, 1905. These bold chest tattoos were done by Sutherland MacDonald, one of the first famous professional tattooists in Britain. The crisp dragon and coat of arms show how high-skill tattooing already was. 1974 to 1976, Jeffrey Epstein is seen during his short time teaching physics and math at the Dalton School. The calm classroom image feels surreal, knowing how famously his later life unraveled far from any chalkboard. Ludgate Hill, London, 1893. A street worker strides over the cobbles with a massive bundle balanced on her head. This was the city's human delivery system before trucks took over, and every step had to be perfect. This is a rare slide-era space view, with an astronaut standing beside lunar hardware under a pitch-black sky. Film slides like these from Apollo and the Viking Mars mission captured details that later digital cameras still chase, and many frames feel almost unreal. 1970 at Graceland in Memphis. Elvis Presley poses in full-stage style while friends and family watch, including Priscilla and Lisa Marie in the background. 1971. Canadian workers wrestle a sedated polar bear into a cage so it can be relocated away from people. Even asleep, the animal's size turns the whole scene into a tense tug-of-war between humans and the Arctic. Austro-Hungarian troops haul an observation balloon into the sky, turning a quiet field into a live eye for artillery. Their army had balloon units as early as 1866, using tethered scouts to spot targets and guide fire with brutal accuracy. In 1938, Jay LaHader shows off his tractor cycle, a tiny tracked bike that could crawl over rough ground at about 25 miles per hour. He even built a version with a mounted weapon, like a one-man tank experiment on a Paris street. Circa 1915 to 1920, Claude Monet stands in his Giverny home, surrounded by huge canvases leaning against the walls like silent windows. Late in life, he painted the water lilies panels on a massive scale. New York City, 1887. Jacob Riis photographs the Short Tails, an Irish river pirate gang from the Lower East Side, crouched in a filthy dock space. They stole cargo from waterfront boats and vanished into the city's shadows. Austro-Hungarian soldiers play cards in full gas masks, turning a normal break into something eerie and mechanical. The masks were meant for sudden chemical attacks, so even a simple game had to be played ready for the worst. GNR officer cadets lean over a field map, using a compass like a tiny control panel to turn paper lines into real ground. In training, one wrong bearing could send a whole unit the wrong way, so these quiet minutes decided everything later. Canada, 1920. The inventor of precast concrete pipe sits inside his own pipe, while more than 21 tons of sandbags are stacked above it. It is a bold proof test meant to sell trust, because one crack would have ended the stunt instantly. 1945. A captured Heinkel, He-162. White 4 sits at Castle Waldau, a rushed late-war jet fighter built when Germany was running out of time. Its tiny airframe and top-mounted engine made it look like a rocket with wheels. On the rocky karst front, Austro-Hungarian troops use a periscope aiming device that lets them fire from a trench without lifting their heads above the edge. Patented in 1915 by Heinrich Pleis and produced by Ernst Leitz in Wetzlar. February 1, 1945. B-24. Liberators drop 55-gallon gasoline drums on Iwo Jima to burn away thick plant cover before the landings 2 weeks later. 1991. Camels walk across a flat desert while a massive wall of smoke and fire boils up behind them. The calm silhouettes against that dark sky feel unreal, like nature trying to ignore a disaster. December 13, 1972. Apollo 17 astronaut Harrison H. Schmitt stands beside a split lunar boulder at Taurus Littrow, reading the moon's geology like an open book. This was the last human mission to the moon. 1982, at Dryden Flight Research Center, President Ronald Reagan stands before Space Shuttle Enterprise and greets the STS-4 crew, Thomas K. Mattingly II and Henry W. Hartsfield, Jr. The Breguet 521 Bizerte served from 1933 to 1944, a biplane flying boat used for French maritime patrol and later for air-sea rescue after Germany took control of many airframes. Circa 1955, Donald Campbell inspects the sleek Bluebird on the Salt Flats, built to chase speed records where tiny flaws could decide everything. The cockpit bubble and knife-like body make it look more like a jet than a car. An Austro-Hungarian Army mobile electric generator sits on wagon wheels, a rolling power plant built to follow the front. It could run lights, radios, and repair gear, turning electricity into a battlefield advantage long before portable generators were common. A machine gun squad trudges through deep snow to a new position, hauling a heavy gun and gear that was never designed for winter. The white cloaks hide them from a distance, but every step is loud work in a frozen world. Two men stand in a salt flat puddle beside a strange fin-shaped wreck with a United States flag, like a missing piece from a secret test. With no caption to anchor it, the scene feels like found evidence from an experiment that went very wrong. This early American board track speedway was built with steep banking so race cars could stay flat out through the turns. Those wooden planks made the fastest laps feel like a wall ride, but one loose board could change everything in a heartbeat. Built from 1882 to 1889, the fourth bridge rose from the water as a giant steel cantilever, one of the boldest engineering projects of its age. Its scale was so extreme that the phrase, "painting the fourth bridge," became slang for a job that never ends. January 31, 1958. The Explorer 1 launch made the United States a real player in the space race after Sputnik. Explorer 1 also discovered the Van Allen radiation belts, revealing an invisible danger zone wrapped around Earth. An Austro-Hungarian patrol crawls along the Dolomites front, clinging to icy rock with ropes like mountaineers under fire. In this war zone, the mountains were the first enemy, and one slip could erase a whole squad. England, 1943. Women's Auxiliary Air Force plotters at RAF Fighter Command No. 10 Group move markers across a giant map to track raids in real time. Those long pointers turned scattered radar reports into split-second decisions that could save a city. January 31, 1970. Members of the Grateful Dead and their crew were arrested in New Orleans after a show, an incident later tied to the story behind Truckin'. February 1, 1942. Voice of America began broadcasting overseas, aiming news and messages into areas controlled by the Axis powers. The mission was simple and high stakes: reach people who could not trust local radio. Kursk, 1943. Ferdinand No. 112 sits crippled on the salient, one of 39 of these heavy tank destroyers lost there. German reports said mines knocked out some of the first ones. Australia, 1920s. A rabbit hunter's truck is draped with hundreds of pelts, stacked like a moving wall of fur. It looks unbelievable, but rabbits exploded in numbers after being introduced, turning hunting into an industry. Paris, 1906. Alberto Santos Dumont's 14 bis lifts off and flies about 60 meters, one of Europe's first public-powered flights in a fixed-wing machine. January 30, 1926. The ship Dallas returns coated in thick ice after battling a severe gale for 7 hours in zero weather. Each frozen layer is spray turned to armor, heavy enough to make ships list and crews fight for survival. On the Volcade in Nijmegen, dock workers load heavy sacks by crane, while a horse stands ready to haul the cargo inland. It is a hard view of pre-container shipping, where every bag was moved by muscle, rope, and perfect timing. January 30th, 1956. Martin Luther King Jr.'s home in Montgomery, Alabama, was bombed during the bus boycott, tearing apart the front porch. The attack failed to stop the movement, and the boycott kept growing into a national turning point. October 14th, 1944. An RAF Lancaster from No. 101 Squadron drops up to 183-pound J incendiaries over Duisburg during Operation Hurricane. January 30th, 1968. The Tet Offensive begins as Viet Cong and North Vietnamese forces strike across South Vietnam, shattering the idea that the war was winding down. 1944. A Soviet soldier stands beside the experimental Gaz-68, a wheeled anti-tank self-propelled gun built to test new ways of moving firepower fast. A 1920s bakery storefront is stacked to the ceiling with Peschel Bakery Company crates, turning the sidewalk into a bread warehouse. If the labels really say Allenville, Wisconsin, this could be a rare snapshot of how small-town bakeries shipped their goods before plastic bags. February 3rd, 1926. The New York Stock Exchange floor blurs into a storm of bodies during heavy trading. The motion streaks show a market run by paper, shouting, and seconds, long before silent screens took over. February 3rd, 1966. The Soviet Luna 9 made the first soft landing on the moon and sent the first photos from the surface back to Earth. That squat little craft proved the ground could hold a lander, clearing one of the biggest fears before humans ever tried it. September 19th, 1994. United States paratroopers moved through Port-au-Prince Airport during Operation Uphold Democracy, the start of the intervention in Haiti. February 1st, 1943. The B-17F, All-American, lands at Biskra, with its tail nearly torn open after a mid-air collision over Tunis. It still made it home with a huge section missing. In 1955, one of the last living American Civil War veterans poses beside a United States Air Force fighter, a single lifetime spanning muskets to jets. The contrast is unreal. A man born before the telephone standing under a machine built to break the sound barrier. Emperor Hirohito rides his horse Shirayuki in a 1942 military parade, a calm face framed by rows of uniforms and medals. Vera Ellen strikes a classic late 1940s beach shower pose, the kind of studio publicity shot that made Hollywood glamour look effortless. She was one of the era's most athletic dancers, later dazzling in On the Town and White Christmas. In 1860, the Clotilda made an illegal landing near Mobile, Alabama, bringing more than 100 Africans to the United States years after the ban. February 3, 1944, U.S. forces seized Kwajalein Atoll, the first major American strike into Japan's Marshall Islands defense ring during Operation Flintlock. In northern Italy in 1944, Italian auxiliaries posed with a German Luftwaffe anti-aircraft gun built to throw shells high enough to reach Allied bombers. This is Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto saluting his naval aviators at Rabaul on April 18, 1943, just before he boarded his inspection tour flight. American codebreakers read his timetable, and Operation Vengeance sent fighters to intercept him over Bougainville. Afghan MiG-21 pilots posed beside the Soviet-designed supersonic fighter that became one of the most produced jet aircraft in history. In the late 1980s, Democratic Republic of Afghanistan crews flew these jets with Soviet support. This photo shows the wreck from the car crash that took Viktor Tsoi's life in Latvia in August 1990, right as his band Kino was at peak fame. Reports said he likely fell asleep at the wheel and hit a bus at about 130 kilometers per hour. In February 1942, the Minneapolis Sunday Tribune ran a story on 100-year-old Civil War veteran Milton H. Myers, who said America's youth could win the new war. Known on stage as Clico, This South African Korana sideshow performer was famous for short-stature dance routines that blended traditional Korana steps with what Western crowds called exotic showmanship. In 1921, Bessie Coleman became the first Black American woman and the first person of Native American descent to earn an international pilot's license, after U.S. flight schools turned her away, and she learned French to train in France. In 1998, German World War I veteran Hans Lange held a portrait of himself at 19 in 1918, like a time travel mirror across 80 years. Born in 1899, a battlefield blast damaged his eyes. This World War I-style trench photo is a staged propaganda parody using barbed wire and a captured cap to look like a trophy scene. Images like this were made to push fear and anger. In 1967 at the Pentagon, a young protester pushed a single flower toward a line of military police, turning a tense standoff into one quiet image of choice. In April 1964, a Brazilian army tank rolled in front of the Ministry of War as a coup began, turning a city street into a warning. The painted national marking on the armor makes it feel official, but the real message is simple. Power had moved from speeches to steel. In February 1926, Franklin Delano Roosevelt hosted British politician Oswald Mosley on his boat, long before both names became loaded with history. In 1961, on the set of The Misfits, Marilyn Monroe chats with a little girl while Montgomery Clift waits in the background between takes. It was Monroe's last completed movie, filmed in Nevada's desert heat, and both leads were physically struggling during production. In Sicily in 1943, an Italian Semovente M41M, armed with a 90mm gun, fires a live round, the muzzle blast blooming white against the hillside. This vehicle was built by mounting an anti-aircraft 90/53 gun on a tank chassis. On March 31, 1970, Japan Airlines Flight 351 was seized in mid-air and the crew was forced to head for Pyongyang. South Korean and Japanese officials secretly dressed Seoul Gimpo Airport to look like North Korea. On February 2, 1913, at 1 minute past midnight, Grand Central Terminal officially opened and New York poured into the vast new hall. More than 150,000 people visited on opening day, proving the station was instantly a city landmark. In 1943, Jewish partisan and photographer Faye Schulman posed in the snow with a PPSH submachine gun, fighting while also recording what she saw. Her camera and her weapon served the same goal: keep proof alive when people were trying to erase it. In February 1991, near Az Salman, 82nd Airborne paratroopers from 4325 Air Halt on objective white and watch smoke rise as nearby Iraqi bunker positions are cleared. London in 1940. Families haul their belongings past shattered row houses after night air raids turned whole streets into rubble. The handcart and bundles show how fast life could be packed into minutes when the sirens started. On July 4, 1903, the battleship USS Kearsarge was wrapped in electric lights for Independence Day, with her name blazing across the bridge like a floating billboard. It is an early snapshot of the new electric age. In 1943, a Soviet-used Churchill Mark IV rolls past a knocked-out German SDKFZ 232 armored car, showing British armor fighting on the Eastern Front through Lend-Lease. The Churchill's boxy hull and heavy tracks were built for survival. In 1917, near Meran by the Italian front, Serbian prisoners are marched in under Austrian guard to be used as forced labor behind the lines. The packed trucks and rifles show how the war ran on manpower. In 1960, on the set of The Magnificent Seven, Yul Brynner celebrates marrying Chilean model Doris Kleiner, surrounded by his co-stars Charles Bronson, Eli Wallach, Horst Buchholz, Brad Dexter, and Steve McQueen. This rare World War I trench snapshot shows a lone sentry perched on a ladder platform high in stripped trees, watching for movement across no man's land. The almost empty frame is the shock, hours of waiting exposed to weather and sudden fire. In December 1989, after Nicolae Ceausescu was overthrown, armed revolutionary soldiers marched detained men through a Romanian street with their hands on their heads. The scary mystery is who was truly a Securitate agent and who was just accused. In the meantime, we're looking at the photos. Write in the comments which photo you liked the most and why. I will be glad to answer you. In World War I, Austro-Hungarian engineers rush an oxygen cylinder to a sapper overcome by smoke and gas while working at a tunnel entrance. Digging rock shelters was brutal and deadly work because one bad pocket of air could drop a man before a single shot was fired. On September 24, 1935, Finnish Field Marshal Carl Gustaf Mannerheim posed with a 14-point stag taken near Geroyskoye in East Prussia during a visit hosted by Hermann Göring. Ursula Bajano, a famed sideshow performer and actress, born with hypertrichosis and hyperdontia, is seen here in her later years with her signature jewelry and polished style. After her husband Emmett died in 1995, she shaved her beard as mourning and never grew it back. On September 17, 1939, Soviet soldiers tear apart Polish border fortifications as the Soviet invasion begins, just weeks after Germany attacked from the west. The brutal detail is that these defenses were being dismantled almost as soon as they were faced. In 1944, Imperial Japanese Navy fighter pilot Yoshio Nakamura poses in flight gear on the airfield, a calm face before another sortie. He is credited with 9 aerial victories and survived to the end of the Pacific War. This is the only known authentic photo of Titanic's dining saloon, shot during breakfast on April 11, 1912, by Father Brown. It captures the ship's everyday luxury just days before the disaster. Mary and Margaret Gibb were conjoined twins who left Massachusetts for New York and built a career in vaudeville and sideshow acts, often photographed in matching coats and hats like any stylish pair of sisters. After years on stage, they returned home and ran a gift shop for 7 years. In 1978, musicians from The Clash, Steel Pulse, and the Sex Pistols stood outside the National Front headquarters in Teddington, holding anti-racism protest signs. The sharp twist is that punk and reggae rivals linked up on the street, using fame as a shield. On February 2, 1901, Queen Victoria's funeral procession moved at Windsor Castle, ending the era of the woman who defined Britain for decades. Her reign lasted 63 years, the longest in British history at the time. In October 10, 1978, Florence Thompson held up the frame of her own face, the migrant mother from Dorothea Lange's 1936 photograph. On February 2, 1933, 7 cruisers sit packed at Pearl Harbor, including Augusta, Chicago, Salt Lake City, Louisville, Pensacola, Northampton, and Chester. This calm fleet lineup was photographed 8 years before Pearl Harbor became world famous. In 1933, at the Pikes Peak Hill Climb in Colorado, the Trophy Girl poses beside a stripped-down race car with the massive Winner's Cup perched on its nose. The wild fact is that this race climbs over 14,000 feet above sea level. In 1916, a Russian Imperial Army soldier lies low in the dirt during a marksmanship drill, gripping what looks like a Mosin-Nagant rifle. Within about a year, the empire would collapse in revolution. On March 22, 1941, RAF pilots of No. 85 Squadron, including Peter Townsend, pose wearing Mark I night adaptation goggles to preserve night vision for air combat. In October 1945 at Ninan, during the liberation of Manchuria, Junior Lieutenant Pavel Fedorovich Kachanov of the 210th Tank Brigade, 1st Far Eastern Front, poses as a T-34 tank commander. In Dagestan in 1919, Red Army cavalrymen from the mountain Jewish community ride through a crowd with a Star of David banner visible at the edge of the frame. The same symbol would later sit at the center of Israel's flag. In 1949 at Cleethorpes Beach, the Big Dipper wooden roller coaster snapped this split-second photo as riders hit a dip and faces turned into pure motion. The boy circled is 14 here and 91 today. In 1945, British ships sit anchored inside Japan's naval base at Kure, with the submarine tender HMS Adamant in the foreground and the Japanese carrier Katsuragi off to the right. The surreal fact is that Allied vessels were now calmly moored in an enemy stronghold. In 1942, airmen of the United States Army Air Force's 90th Bombardment Group pose in skull masks in front of their Jolly Roger tail art. The crossed arms stance and pirate flag were a psychological flex. Around October 7, 1983 in East Berlin, a National People's Army MTLB armored carrier waits on Karl Marx Allee before the Republic Day parade. Built as a tough, amphibious tracked workhorse, the MTLB could haul troops, tow guns, or carry specialized gear. In the early 1900s, Milwaukee Fire Department firefighters posed as a baseball team with their bat boy, wearing matching MFD uniforms in a packed ballpark. Before television and pro sports money, city departments built pride this way. This South Carolina penitentiary photo shows Sue Logue, the only woman ever given the state's electric chair sentence, in 1942. The case spiraled from a feud over a dead calf into a chain of violence that ended with 8 lives lost. On February 2, 1926 in New York, Russian wrestling champion Ivan Podobny lost his title to Joe Stecher after 1 hour 38 minutes and 37 seconds, ending the match with an arm lock. This behind-the-scenes shot from Dead Presidents in 1995 shows Bokeem Woodbine, Freddie Rodriguez, Lorenz Tate, and Keith David mid-stride in street clothes between takes. The film became a cult favorite for its gritty Vietnam-to-homefront story. In late 1980s Romania, people packed into long street lines outside food shops because basics were rationed and often disappeared fast. These hours-long queues became daily life under Nicolae Ceausescu's austerity drive to pay off foreign debt. This rare 1912 deck photo shows real Titanic passengers strolling past the lifeboat davits and rigging dressed for cold Atlantic air. It is a normal travel moment from a ship that would be gone days later, which makes every calm face feel unreal. In the German prisoner of war camp Stalag 1, B. Hohenstein, soldiers from the French colonial forces are held behind barbed wire under guard. The uniforms and bare earth show a harsh reality. Men from Africa and other colonies were captured in Europe. On February 3, 1961, the United States Air Force began Operation Looking Glass, keeping an airborne command post in the sky to ensure nuclear forces could still be controlled if ground headquarters were lost. This groundbreaking photo captures the launch of Johnny's all-weather drive-in in Copenhagen, New York, a gigantic 28-acre outdoor theater. When it opened in 1957, it ranked among the nation's largest drive-ins, built for thousands of cars at once. On October 4, 1956, at Maralinga, Australia, the Marco test detonated Britain's first operational nuclear weapon, Blue Danube, at about 1.5 kilotons. The blast carved a crater about 50 meters wide and 12 meters deep. The Austro-Hungarian KUK Seaflieger Corps flew fragile open-cockpit seaplanes over the Adriatic with almost no navigation gear, doing reconnaissance, coastal patrols, and air raids from the waves. They even scored the first confirmed submarine sinking by an aircraft in history. Designed in 1898 by August von Parseval and Hans Bartsch von Sigsfeld, this kite balloon stayed stable in wind using its teardrop body and rear airbag, so armies could watch the battlefield from a tether. In 1968, Donald Crowhurst quit the Golden Globe race in secret when his boat proved unsafe, then spent 7 months faking radio positions to look like he was circling the world. His yacht was later found empty at sea with unsettling log entries. In 1926, at Glen Echo Park in Maryland, women crowd into early bumper cars, laughing under the roof of the pavilion like it is the newest machine in town. These first models ran on electric power from an overhead grid. In June 1940, an Italian L3/33 tankette sits on the French-Italian border by a road sign pointing to Lanlebourg and Chambéry. The tiny tracked machine looks harmless, but its job was to crawl up mountain roads. In 1961, at the Geneva Motor Show, Jaguar unveiled the E-Type, a sleek, low-nose sports car that instantly reset what fast and beautiful looked like. Even Enzo Ferrari reportedly called it the most beautiful car ever made. In 1942, in the Mozhaisk district near Moscow, children stand beside destroyed German-marked armored cars that began life as Spanish Republican AAS 1937 vehicles built in Barcelona on Chevrolet truck chassis. In September 1941, soldiers of Italy's 9th Division Pasubio rushed the Petrovka rail station through smoke and dust, using the tracks as a straight-line assault path. The rails make the scene extra tense because a station attack is about cutting movement. In Wales in 1921, 15-year-old Harold Jones was photographed outside a shop wearing a gold watch given to celebrate his acquittal in the killing of a young girl. Weeks later, another girl was killed, and Jones was convicted. In early 1942, a Japanese Kawasaki Ki 48 Lily lifts off for a bombing mission over Rangoon, its shadow racing under the wheels. The Ki 48 was built for speed and surprise, but its light armor. On May 20, 1927, Charles Lindbergh stands beside the Spirit of St. Louis just before taking off from Roosevelt Field for the first solo nonstop transatlantic flight. He would fly 3,610 miles to Paris-Le Bourget. In Los Angeles in 1935, 21-year-old Doreen Peterson was arrested for evading train fares, a tiny crime that screams Great Depression desperation. The jail bars and her work-worn clothes make the point. At the 1952 Winter Olympics in Oslo, Norway, an enormous crowd packs the hillsides to watch ski jumping on the Holmenkollen Hill. The scale is wild. Tens of thousands stood in winter cold just to see a few seconds of flight at the edge of human control. In Athens in 1896, this is the first opening ceremony of the first modern Olympic Games, filling the Panathenaic Stadium with spectators and marching athletes. The wild detail is that the stadium was rebuilt in white marble on an ancient site. In April 1968, Jacqueline Kennedy meets Coretta Scott King at Martin Luther King Jr.'s funeral, a quiet moment of support caught in one frame. Days earlier, King was killed in Memphis, and the funeral in Atlanta drew national leaders, cameras, and massive crowds. In 1944, the Ovitz family, 7 relatives with dwarfism, were deported to Auschwitz and kept together instead of being split up. They survived after being singled out for medical study by Joseph Mengele. This is an Italian CR-42 Falco adapted as a night fighter, fitted with a searchlight under the left wing so it could find targets in the dark. It served with the 300th Squadriglia of the 167th Autonomous Group. If the Yan'an faction had removed Kim Il-sung in 1956, North Korea would likely have leaned far more toward Beijing, with less personality rule and a weaker push for self-reliance politics. Near Stalingrad in February to March 1943, Red Army troops examine a frozen line of captured German half-tracks, including SDKFZ 251 and the smaller SDKFZ 250. The tel is the tactical symbol on the front plate, marking an engineer unit. In Stalingrad in 1943, the torn fuselage of a German Heinkel He-111 lies in the open, a bomber reduced to an empty metal tube. On February 3, 1918 in San Francisco, the first streetcar rolls out as the Twin Peaks Tunnel opens, slicing straight through the hills for riders. At 11,920 feet long, it was the world's longest streetcar tunnel at the time. In 1917, General Sergei Markov sits with officers and military editors at a congress that tried to shape how the Army was explained to the public during Russia's collapse. Within months, he would become a key founder of the White Volunteer Army. On July 25, 1929, off Block Island, Rhode Island, Amelia Earhart smiles while being strapped into a heavy, early deep-sea diving suit. It is a strange preview of her fearless brand. In 1981, during the South African Border War, An Army photographer brews coffee over an open fire while members of 32 Battalion sit in the background. The chilling contrast is that he was there to document the war officially. On January 30th, 1945, United States Army Rangers and Filipino resistance fighters carried out the raid at Cabanatuan, breaking into a Japanese-held prison camp in the Philippines. The strike freed over 500 Allied prisoners, many too weak to walk. In 1912, at Six Nations of the Grand River in Ontario, a couple works side by side outside a log home using a tall wooden pestle to process food in a barrel. The everyday detail is the shock. No ceremony, no posing, just labor caught mid-motion. In April 1945, on a Berlin street, a Soviet T-34 from the 7th Guards Tank Corps rolls past as Volkssturm troops surrender with their hands raised. The stark detail is the tank number 341 on the hull. On February 2, 1926, in New York, a Charleston dance marathon started with 16 dancers. But after 13 hours, only 4 exhausted men were still standing by 10 in the morning. The women had all collapsed or quit. Some were taken to the hospital. On February 1, 1926, a corner lot at Broadway and Wall Street sold for a record $7 per square inch, a price so extreme it sounds like a joke. That works out to $1,008 per square foot. In 1941 to 1942, near Yukhnov, a Soviet anti-tank rifle fires in the dark, the muzzle blast turning the snow into a flashlit cloud. In night fighting, that brief white burst could reveal the shooter's position, so every shot was both a strike and a risk. In April 1945, during the Battle of Berlin, a Soviet T-3485 from the 7th Guards Tank Corps, side number 341, pushes past a burning wreck on a shattered street. In 1942, at Stalingrad's Square of Fallen Fighters, a Soviet BA-10 armored car sits among the wrecked School of Pilots and House of Pilots, with shattered windows stacked like empty frames. The BA-10 was a 6-wheeled Scout built from a truck chassis. In 1965, Terry Nish and Gary Brown's handmade roadster sits in a garage, marked number 6, like a private experiment that escaped onto the track. The open engine bay and stripped body show pure function. In August 1945 in Manchuria, Soviet soldiers crowd around an abandoned Japanese fortress gun, studying the huge barrel up close like a captured secret. Fixed defenses like these could not move fast enough for the late war. This assembly line was mostly hands and hammers. Workers hand-fit aluminum bodies and bolt in big American V8 power to build the Shelby Cobra in the 1960s. The cars look identical here, but small differences from hand building made each one a little unique. Tommaso Buscetta, a former Sicilian mob insider turned state witness, is seen arriving under guard to testify in New York during the Pizza Connection trial in 1986 to 1987. The case exposed a huge pipeline that moved heroin across the Atlantic using pizzerias as cover. Workers build the Clifton Suspension Bridge over the Avon Gorge in Bristol around 1860, raising the massive stone towers that would hold its iron chains. Designed by Isambard Kingdom Brunel, but finished in 1864 after his death. A steam locomotive rolls into Hackensack, New Jersey on February 26, 1934, turning the platform into a white fog of snow and exhaust as bundled passengers wait. It is pure Great Depression commuting when steam still ruled most American rail lines. John Gutman's The Game catches a New Orleans street scene in 1937, where masked revelers stride through a littered parade route like characters in a silent film. The blank face, tiny mustache mask, and cane turn a normal walk into something unsettling. A U.S. Navy aviator in training climbs onto a Grumman F-6F Hellcat in 1945, tightening his harness beside the cockpit before engine start. The Hellcat was the Navy's main carrier fighter late in the war, and this close-up shows how cramped. Romania's protected cruiser Elisabetta runs her sailing rig trials off the Firth of Forth in September 1888. a steam warship still carrying full masts to stretch range and save coal. Built in just 16 months at Armstrong, Mitchell and Company, this 1880-era line shack was a tiny outpost where cowboys camped to watch open-range cattle before barbed wire fencing spread across the West. With little more than a dirt and log shelter, a horse tied outside, and a long gun leaning nearby. On February 1, 1893, Thomas Edison finished the Black Maria in West Orange, New Jersey, widely called the first purpose-built movie studio. On January 18, 1965, during the Selma Voting Rights Campaign, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was struck by a segregationist inside a Selma, Alabama hotel. Photographers caught the moment he stayed calm and kept moving. Italian ground crew load munitions onto a Savoia Marchetti SM-79 trimotor in North Africa in August 1940, when Italy's air campaign in Libya was just ramping up. The SM-79 began life as a sleek, record-setting aircraft. A woman uses an electric waffle iron in a streamlined 1950s all-electric kitchen with coffee already set beside stacked cups and saucers. This was the peak era of push-button home gadgets, when builders sold modern life as power, speed, and convenience on one countertop. John Lennon and Yoko Ono staged their famous Bed-In for Peace in 1969, turning a hotel room into a non-stop media event with hand-lettered slogans on the wall. The point was to use celebrity attention like a megaphone. In 1912, inventor Franz Reichelt showed off a homemade parachute suit by stepping off the Eiffel Tower, convinced it would open like wings. Pate News filmed the attempt, and the result became one of the earliest aviation stunts ever caught on motion picture. An unidentified Japanese army officer stands during the Malaya Campaign in 1942, likely attached to the first independent anti-tank company. Photos like this are rare because they capture the quiet, ordinary moments behind a fast-moving invasion. A German woman collapses in the broken stone of Dessau after the city was hit from the air on March 7, 1945. One face in a sea of rubble shows how fast a normal street can turn into a world with no safe place. Subscribe to the channel. There are such interesting selections every day. Bye.